Here we go. The breaking news now to Washington. General Michael Flynn will be in court 1 hour from now, District Court in Washington, D.C. He's been charged with lying to the FBI. This seems to date around an interview that took place on January 24th, 2017. So that's within a week of the inauguration, during the beginning of his term for the Trump team. And it references a conversation or some discussion he had with the Russian ambassador about 4 weeks prior. So this would be the end of December 2016, during the transition now. December 29th is stated here, December 22nd, 12/22, 2016. The court order reads that Flynn did not ask the Russian ambassador to refrain from escalating a situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia that same day. So what did Flynn tell the FBI? What was he honest about? And what did he lie about? And that last part is where the court will zero in today.
And in the opening statement of the U.S. District Court document, it details that Flynn did willfully and knowingly make materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements and representations in a matter within the jurisdiction of the executive branch of the government of the United States, to wit, the defendant falsely stated and represented to agents of the FBI in Washington, D.C., and it goes on to detail.
I'm going to get back to this news. We broke it about an hour ago. Michael Flynn has now turned himself in to the FBI. Do we have the judge with us? We do not?
Yes, you do.
We do. Judge Napolitano, the significance here seems to be that maybe him pleading guilty opens the door and a pathway directly to President Trump. Is that the case?
I think it probably is the case, Stuart. Let me give you some, since you're a numbers person, some numbers. If General Flynn had been charged and convicted of all of the crimes for which the government says it has evidence against him, he would have been facing 60 years, 60 years in jail. As a result of the guilty plea this morning, that's been reduced to somewhere between 6 and 12 months. Now, that enormous reduction does not come easily. It comes when you give this government something that they desperately want. So the tantalizing question is, what is it that General Flynn has that the government wants? Knowledge of the behavior and communications and interactions of people in the Trump campaign with the Russian government in the time period June 2015 until the president's election. Now, we saw some of this coming when last week, the day before Thanksgiving, the general's lawyers told the White House that they would no longer participate in what's known as the Joint Defense Agreement. That was an agreement amongst the lawyers for the President and General Flynn, in which they agree they will share evidence, share communications, and not point fingers at each other. Once General Flynn's lawyers withdrew from the agreement, they went to the special prosecutor and must have cut a deal on Monday, which is when they visited him. So sometime between Monday and today, they reduced that deal to writing. The prosecutor's lawyers are satisfied the general has real evidence that we can really use to prosecute someone, perhaps the president, we don't know. And in order to lock the general in, they've got him to plead guilty this morning. Now, once he pleads guilty, we will see a written plea agreement, a document somewhere between 5 and 10 pages in length, which will tell us what the general has agreed to do and what the government has agreed not to do to him in return for what he's going to tell them.
All right, Judge, look, thank you very much indeed for breaking in for us this morning, because this is very important stuff, and we appreciate it.
I believe he was taken into custody. He was charged this morning. The special counsel filing this one charge in an information with the U.S. District Court here in Washington, and it relates to his conversation with the former Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. Remember, there was a lot of scrutiny concerning that conversation. The FBI subsequently interviewed him following that conversation. They interviewed him in January, and it is the statements that he made to them during that interview in January that they are now saying he lied to FBI agents about the nature of that conversation. Also, you recall it was the former Attorney General, Sally Yates, who raised issues about this conversation. She went to the White House raised issues with the chief counsel there, Don McGahn, saying that she had some concerns about the nature of those conversations. Well, we now learn that the FBI has charged him, believes that he had lied to them, and the special counsel has charged him with lying to the FBI about that conversation. The information goes into some detail about those conversations, and we're reading through that right now. And basically it says that, let me just read some of this to you, John. It's probably the best way to do this. That on December 29th, in one of the conversations in 2016, Flynn, it says, did not ask the government of Russia's ambassador to the United States to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia. Again, when the FBI confronted him about these conversations, he lied about the nature, allegedly, according to these documents, about the nature of the conversation. Again, also, remember, he told the vice president that he did not have those conversations, did not talk about sanctions. Ultimately, lying to the vice president got him fired, and now more serious charges here against the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. He's now charged with at least one count of lying to the FBI.
News. All right. We have breaking news, and it is major breaking news in the Russia investigation. CNN has just learned that Robert Mueller has charged former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn with willfully and knowingly making false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements to the FBI. This has to do with his meetings that he held with the former Russian ambassador. Again, Michael Flynn charged with making false statements to the FBI. Let's go right away to Shimon Prokupecz for the details on this. Shimon.
That's right, John. So we believe he was taken into custody. He was charged this morning. The special counsel filing this one charge in an information with the U.S. District Court here in Washington, and it relates to his conversation with the former Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. Remember, there was a lot of scrutiny concerning that conversation. The FBI subsequently interviewed him following that conversation. They interviewed him in January, and it is the statements that he made to them during that interview in January that they are now saying he lied to FBI agents about the nature of that conversation. Also, you recall it was the former Attorney General, Sally Yates, who raised issues about this conversation. She went to the White House, raised issues with the chief counsel there, Don McGahn, saying that she had some concerns about the nature of those conversations. Well, we now learn that the FBI has charged him, believes that he had lied to them, and the special counsel has charged him with lying to the FBI about that conversation. The information goes into some detail about those conversations, and we're reading through that right now. And basically it says that, let me just read some of this to you, John. That's probably the best way to do this. That on December 29th, in one of the conversations in 2016, Flynn, it says, did not ask the government of Russia's ambassador to the United States to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia. Again, when the FBI confronted him about these conversations, he lied about the nature, allegedly, according to these documents, about the nature of the conversation. Again, also, remember, he told the vice president that he did not have those conversations, did not talk about sanctions. Ultimately, lying to the vice president got him fired, and now more serious charges here against the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. He's now charged with at least one count of lying to the FBI.
All right, Shimon Prokupecz, stand by. Oh, actually, Shimon, I have one more important question here. Charge, do we know if he's pleading guilty to this yet?
Right, so there's been a lot of talk that he's been negotiating a plea deal. We have not been told if this means. Usually this, by filing an information like this usually follows the standard of what we see in where a person pleads guilty. So the prosecutors will file an information. Following that, perhaps maybe this afternoon, we may see a plea from Michael Flynn. You know, we've been told that there have been conversations, ongoing conversations for a possible deal. We've also been told there has been a grand jury activity, a grand jury testimony that has been ongoing here in D.C. regarding the investigation. So this is not as severe, perhaps, as a grand jury indictment. And usually we do see an information is filed when someone plans to plead guilty. So that could happen here today.
All right, Shimon, stand by. We'll let you get back to reporting for a second. Join me now on the phone is CNN's chief legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin. Jeffrey, thanks so much for being with us. I have a few questions for you. Let's walk through these one at a time.
I'm sorry, John. Can I just interrupt?
Please.
Because I just received notice from the special counsel's office that Flynn will be appearing at 10:30 this morning to plead. And it doesn't say specifically that he's going to plead guilty, but it is an information, not an indictment, which almost certainly means a guilty plea, because information means the defendant has waived the possibility of indictment. So this appears to be almost certainly a guilty plea by Michael Flynn to lying to the FBI at 10:30 this morning at the federal court in Washington, D.C. So,
okay.
I mean, that's the headline, is that he will appear in court at 10:30, and it appears virtually certain that it will be a guilty plea.
That's why I was asking Shimon. We have every reason to believe he will plead guilty to this at 10:30. So, Jeffrey, the significance of that.
Well, it's of immense significance, because Michael Flynn was an extremely high-ranking member of the Trump administration. He was National Security Advisor, albeit less than a month. He was also someone who was intimately involved in the Trump campaign and had many connections with Russians, including meeting with Vladimir Putin in December of 2015. So a guilty plea by Michael Flynn with the agreement to cooperate and testify is certainly the biggest development of the Mueller investigation since he was appointed in May.
And Jeffrey,
it is important to point out that it is not clear what kind of cooperation he can provide, whether he will provide evidence of other illegal activities. But the fact that the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States is pleading guilty to a felony is a very big deal in and of itself. And it certainly shows that the Mueller investigation is far from winding down, but in fact gearing up.
Again, just some perspective here. The president's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, has been indicted, charged with crimes. The president's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has now been charged with lying and will, we expect, plead guilty. Jeffrey, another legal point here. This seems to be a fairly narrow charge that he's going to plead guilty to. This is specifically just about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador during the transition. It does not include all kinds of questions about how Michael Flynn registered, whether he registered the right way, as a lobbyist, questions he had with Turkey, his own business interactions. That's not part of this. Now, I guess we don't know for certain whether or not being charged for that is part of the deal, but one of the things we do know is that Michael Flynn was very concerned about protecting his son, who was, of course, tied up with all of that.
That's right, and something you will certainly hear from the White House and White House advisors is that this wrongdoing, presumably, assuming that Flynn pleads guilty to it, does not involve other people in the White House, does not suggest any sort of conspiratorial behavior by other people in the campaign, wrongdoing by the president or the president's family or other people in the campaign. It is a discrete crime committed by Michael Flynn, if it was in fact committed by him, of lying to the FBI. So, while it is highly significant, it does not in and of itself implicate other people, including the president, with criminal wrongdoing.
All right, Jeffrey, stand by. We have much more to ask you. We have a breaking response from the White House right now, a non-response, if you will. Raj Shah, White House spokesman, says the White House is not going to respond to this, although White House lawyer Ty Cobb will at some point. I'm joined now by Jonathan Martin, a CNN political analyst, writer for the New York Times. Jonathan, we've been hearing a lot from the president this week on a whole range of subjects, people wondering what's going on in his head now that his national security advisor, his former national security advisor, is pleading guilty in the Russia investigation. Yeah. Does this show to you that maybe the president knew this was coming?
I don't know if he knew it was coming, but I can say this with total confidence. This could not come at a worse time for the president and for his party. Think about this for a minute, John. They are on the doorstep of passing their first major piece of legislation of the year. It's now December the 1st. The Senate is poised to pass a sweeping tax cut bill late tonight or perhaps tomorrow. It appears that they do have the votes. The House has already passed their version. That would give them a real victory. Now, we can litigate what that means in terms of the campaign next year, because Democrats will say it sure as heck is not a victory. But it's an accomplishment that Mr. Trump and his party have desperately sought. And here, at this very moment of trying to get this bill done, they are faced with word that the former National Security Advisor, a mere 9 months ago, has been taken into federal custody for lying to the FBI. If you are the president, if you are Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, I think you're going to be uttering a few four-letter words today.
All right, just to bring people up to speed here. Michael Flynn, the president's fired National Security Advisor, we understand will plead guilty. We believe he will plead guilty to lying to the FBI. That will happen at 10:30 today. This is part of the Russia investigation. He will be the second player involved with the Trump campaign to plead guilty to lying about Russia. The first was George Papadopoulos, who Trump associates have called a coffee boy. Well, you know, retired General Michael Flynn is no coffee boy. He was the president's national security advisor and most prominent foreign policy advisor during the campaign.
Real news, real reports, real things happening around the world right now.